vehicle widely used by the German army through Second World War, a familiar sight in many war movies. It was designed to be the main tank of the Panzer divisions, but even though it was constantly upgraded, it quickly became obsolete, as the armored vehicles developed at an astounding speed during the war. So let's see how this well-known vehicle was born. Between the two world wars, the German tank doctrine more or less was the same as everywhere else in the world. As many other countries, they aimed to use two different types of tanks. One with the main goal to attack and destroy enemy armor, equipped with high-velocity guns capable of firing armor-piercing rounds, and the other to support the infantry, usually equipped with larger bore but low-velocity guns capable of firing high-explosive shells. For the first role, new specifications were laid down in 1934 with the lead of Heinz Guderian. The new tank design was meant to have a maximum weight of 24 tons and a maximum speed of 35 km an hour. The new project was approved by the end of January 1934 under the name ZW, which in German stands for Platoon Commander's Vehicle, an attempt to disguise the development from the Western Allies. In February 1934, a meeting was held where a decision was made that the four companies participating in this project will be Krupp, Rheinmetall, MAN and Daimler. Actually, the specifications were worked out in close cooperation with Krupp, who expected to get the contract. But in the end it was decided it's better to hold a competition between the manufacturers. The requirements for the designs were very specific. The vehicle needed a maximum speed of 40 km an hour. For engine it needs to use the Maybach AJ 100, an SSG 75 gearbox and mount a 37mm gun, which was based on the infantry 37mm PEC 36 anti-tank gun. The proposed designs were very similar, and after examination it was decided the work will be split up between the companies. Daimler and MAN received contracts to work on the chassis prototypes, Krupp and Rheinmetall to design the turret. Krupp actually kept working on their own chassis design, but it was abandoned after just making a wooden mock-up. MAN later decided to leave the competition, so Daimler stayed as the only company with contract for the chassis. The two turret designs from Rheinmetall and Krupp were both tested, and in the end the Krupp one was found better and was chosen for production. The three-man turret housing the commander, gunner and loader was based on experiences with an earlier design, the Neubaufahrzeug. The suspension on the new tank was more of a headache in the development. The first prototypes used Christie-style suspension with coil springs. But after that, between the Panzer III A, B, C and D models, there were several experiments with different leaf spring suspensions, usually with 8 small road wheels and different springs. The final version of the suspension was introduced with the E model, using 6 road wheels and torsion bars. In 1936 the vehicle received its formal designation as Panzerkampfwagen III. The testing and refining of the design and the prototypes took a lot of time. It went on during 1936 and early 1937. The first production units of the A models rolled out of the assembly line in May 1937. This was however just a small production batch of 10 vehicles. The reason behind the small production number was the earlier mentioned suspension problems, as after the A models they moved from Christie suspension to the early leaf spring design. Despite the small numbers produced, these models were actually sent to active units and saw frontline service when World War II broke out. The production numbers stayed very low until the beginning of the war. In 1937 only 10 A and B models were finished and 15 C models. In 1938 25 D models were built, and after that in 1939 the production started to speed up with the E models, from which 96 were finished in that year. Up until the E models, all of them were considered prototypes. Since we are talking about the versions of the tank, we will take a look at the different variants. The first production variant was the A model. 10 were built, from which 8 were armed, and they saw combat in Poland. but these only featured 10 to 60 mm of armor. These were followed by the B models, entered service in 1937 and was the first to feature leaf springs. The C variant that came next also featured leaf spring suspension, but in a slightly different setup. The following D version had upgraded turret armor, which was now 30 mm thick all around, and featured again a new version of the suspension. Finally, the first version, which was in larger scale production, was the E variant, which featured the new torsion bar suspension and thicker 30 mm armor all around. This raised the weight to 20 tons, but it was somewhat balanced out with a new 300 horsepower engine. The next Panzer III F model was mostly similar to the E variant, with only minor modifications, but it brought a big jump in production numbers, as more than 400 units were made compared to the 96 E models. The F model stayed in production until 1941, and from the end of 1940 they received the more powerful 50mm KWK-38 L42 guns. The following G model was produced between March 1940 and early 1941, and also featured minor modifications. Early models were built with 37mm guns, but later this was also changed to the 50mm one. The H variant was the first that was built with the 50mm gun from the beginning, and the frontal armor on the hull was increased to 60mm with additional plates. The production of this model started in October 1940. The G and H models production numbers were actually cut back after a decision was made in early 1940 to push for a better protected version of the tank, as the events in Poland showed that the 30mm armor on earlier versions was not effective against anti-tank weapons. The upgraded J model featured much better protection than its predecessors. It had 50mm thick armor on the hull front and 30mm on the side. The turret featured 30mm armor all around and a 50mm thick gun mantlet. Later J models from the end of 1941 were built with the longer 50mm gun, the KWK-39 L60, and these were renamed L versions. The following M variant was equipped with the long-barreled 50mm gun from the beginning. From early 1943, they featured additional 5mm armor on the hull sides and 10mm on the turret. The final N models mounted the short 75mm gun previously used on the early Panzer IV models, and it was used as an infantry support tank. The reason behind this change was that the 50mm gun was increasingly less effective against the new Soviet tanks, but the long 75mm KWK-40 gun was too heavy for the Panzer III chassis. Instead, the gun was installed on the Panzer IV, which could carry it without big modifications. After this, the Panzer IV became the main tank used against enemy armor, while the Panzer III was relegated to secondary roles. The most common version of the Panzer III, the J variant, featured 50mm armor on the hull front and 30mm on the sides. The turret was similarly armored, with 50mm on the front and 30mm on the side and rear. The commander's cupola was 50mm thick all around. Despite the added armor and its weight increasing to nearly 25 tons, the tank was fairly mobile thanks to its Maybach HR-120 engine, producing 285 horsepower. It could reach a maximum speed of 40 km an hour and had a range of 155 km. The main gun was the 5cm KWK-38 L42 gun, and the secondary armament consisted of two 7.92mm machine guns. The Panzer III participated in combat at every front during World War II. First they saw action in Poland, later in Western Europe, then on the Eastern Front, and also in North Africa. At the beginning of the war, the German army had a very low number of medium tanks. Only a handful of Panzer IIIs participated in the fighting in Poland. Most of the tank force was made up from light tanks, like the Panzer II or the Panzer 38T. On the Western Front, while the majority of the forces were still made up from light tanks, like the Panzer I and Panzer II, the Panzer III saw much heavier use against the French forces. The Western campaign revealed several weaknesses of the Panzers. Their 37mm gun was too weak, only effective against the bigger French tanks like the Saumur 35 or the Char B1 at close ranges, and their armor was also too weak to protect against the French anti-tank guns. But these battles also showed their strong points too. The 5-man crew in the German tanks was much more efficient than the 2 or 3-man crews of the French tanks. The experiences in the Western campaign led to the upgunning of the Panzer III with a stronger 50mm gun. By the time of Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, the majority of the Panzer IIIs were equipped with the stronger 50mm gun. At the beginning of the campaign, the German forces quickly overran the Soviet units, as they mostly met with the old T-26 and BT series light tanks, and the bigger but obsolete T-28 and T-35 medium and heavy tanks. But when the new T-34 and KV-1 tanks appeared, this quickly changed. The T-34 was almost impenetrable to the 37mm German guns, and the 50mm was only effective against it in ranges less than 500 meters. The giant KV-1 and KV-2 tanks were near impenetrable even to the bigger 50mm guns, while both Soviet tanks' 76mm gun could destroy a Panzer III from about 1000 meters. These experiences led to the development of the newer German tanks, like the Panther and the Tiger. I already made videos on the Soviet KV tanks and on the German Panther, so if you're interested in their history, I recommend you watch them. After the defeat in the Battle of Kursk, the German forces tried to outgun their existing tanks, but the Panzer III couldn't mount the bigger 75mm long-barreled guns, contrary to the Panzer IV. This led to the Panzer IV taking over the role of fighting enemy armor, while the Panzer III was relegated to secondary role and its production eventually cancelled in 1943. The Panzer III also saw action in North Africa against the Allied forces from 1941. The German tanks proved to be effective against the British Crusader and American M3 light tanks, but not so much against the heavier Matilda and M3 Lee, which could destroy the Panzer IIIs from greater ranges with their 75mm guns. And the situation only got worse with the appearance of the M4 Shermans. By the end of the war, there were very few Panzer IIIs stayed at frontline service. Most of them were converted to supply vehicles. But the tank destroyers based on the Panzer III chassis were in use up until the end of the war. All in all, the Panzer III was an important part of the German army when the war broke out, but the rapid development of tanks in the coming years and its inability to mount bigger cannons slowly made this tank obsolete at the closing stages of the war. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.